Hi all, Jeff Forster here. I'm out here at East End Park in Kingwood, Texas, and doing part of my social media takeover for ClayHouston. So part of that is actually a Texas Wild Clay Challenge. And so for my part of that project, I've spent over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks a number of hours in different parks in this area looking for natural clay deposits. So the idea is to highlight artists who are using local clays or native clays, and I thought for my part of it, I also wanted to share like sourcing that material. And so for me, that's really a big part of the adventure, and part of the reason of using the native clays is that affinity for the organic and trying to retain those qualities, right? So like I said, I'm at East End Park. The best source of clay that I've been able to discover is actually right behind me out here. These boulders you see in the middle of the water on that bank. Unfortunately, the bank I'm currently on is all sand. There's no clay here. So I've discovered that. I'm going to jump in my kayak and I'm going to get this thing launched. Alright, so I'm back here in my driveway now in my home at Kingwood here, and the question is, what do you do with this wild clay once you harvest it? And the answer, of course, is variable depending upon what you're going to do with it ultimately. If I were going to put this on the wheel and try to throw pots, I'd want to go through a series of sieves, starting with obviously bigger holes or perforations, and then a smaller and smaller grade to kind of remove any impurities that might be in the clay, chunks of sticks, chunks of bigger rocks, things like that that might be abrasive in throwing. I'm gonna probably just press mold my clay, and so I can most likely use it just as it is. And so what I've got here is I've just got an old window screen that I've duct taped into the bottom of this piece of flashing, right? So just parts from Home Depot or Lowe's. And I'm just going to go ahead and pour this clay into there. It's really almost more like a slip right now, simply because I harvested in the water or close to the water. So my original plan was actually to go out to that location and build a project. But once I felt how damp the clay was, I knew there was no way I was going to be able to do that without at least some processing of the material. So, I'm just going to push this out into my container here. So whether you sieve or not is completely up to you. There are a number of potters, including myself in the past, who will use the clay straight out of the ground, and really wild clay in its true form would not be processed, right? Though there are plenty of potters who use local clays and put them through a series of sieves and add dry materials to make it either more workable or even more workable, more plastic to raise. You could add, say, ball clay or EPK, and that would raise the firing temperature. So one of the things about clay in this area is that it does have a very low firing temperature. Most of the native clays that I've tried, there's a yellow gumbo, a black gumbo. So there's a number of varieties, and most of them either melt or at least, the very least, bloat at cone 5-6 range. So you can imagine at high temperatures at cone 10, it's probably going to turn into a glaze, which could potentially be interesting or not, right? So it's just one of those things you'd have to try. So I've put this through the sieve. There were not a lot of impurities. There were a couple little sticks. That was about it. No rocks. But for the most part, it seems like it's a mixture of almost 50-50 clay and sand. So the nice thing is that it's already like this really soupy reclaim kind of consistency. If I had a piece of clay that I dug up and it was like a chunk of clay, maybe in a leather hard stage or even harder, really the best way to approach that would be let it dry out completely to bone dry, slake it down, and that way you get this like slip consistency. And that way it's much easier to put it through a sieve, but even if you're not going to sieve it, you can then start to dry it out, which is what I'm going to do here. I've just spread it out in a thin layer. I'm going to let the canvas kind of soak some moisture out, let it breathe, and come back to it and wedge it when it's time. But this way, when I wedge it back together, I'm going to have a unified consistency. I won't be working with my clay and finding like soft and hard parts in the middle of the clay. Good morning, y'all. I'm back out here at East End Park to finish my Texas Wild Clay Challenge. So I've collected some clay, you may not be able to see it, but from the boulders back here in the water. And I brought it back to my studio, processed that clay to make it more workable. And now I'm just going to take couple styrofoam pieces of packing material. I'm going to spray some Pam cooking oil in here as a release, and then I'm just going to press mold some of that clay in here, and I'm going to leave some unfired clay objects or sculptures just kind of sitting here on the bank or the shore of the lake. So the idea is, and I've been interested in previous projects in using material in the site or location that I find it, and so as the things decompose, that material returns to its source of origin. And I like the idea or the reference to human beings coming from the earth and then eventually decomposing and returning to that space. So that said, here we go. So here they are, 3 finished press molded forms left on the side of the lake to erode in time. I suspect if people don't destroy them once they discover them, that the tide will eventually come up and melt them away and pull them back into the earth. If you're interested in the Texas Wild Clay Challenge, you can stay tuned. Anna Mayer and I are going to do a conversation where we talk about our use of local clays and ideology and processes involved in that. And ClayHouston will be posting that or hosting that conversation in the near future.